We continue our journey in Lent through Holy Week as we deal with the texts of that time between Palm Sunday and Easter so that we might move through that time, move through it spiritually as we approach the end of Lent. Today we have the trial of Jesus before Pilate. There's been an earlier trial before Caiaphas the high priest. But finally, they take him to the governor because it's really only the Roman governor that's going to be able to execute Jesus. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church in this quite familiar story. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "Well, you say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, Jesus didn't answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Don't you hear how many accusations they make against you?" But Jesus didn't give him an answer. Not even to one single charge. The governor was pretty amazed. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner named Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Who do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests and scribes had handed Jesus over. While Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two of you do you want me to release?" And they said, "Barabbas." And Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called Messiah?" And they all said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "But what evil has he done?" And they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water, washed his hands before the crowd, and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." So Pilate released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Hear what the Spirit, I think I'm missing something, saying to our church. I've been reading the various things that Colonel Gaddafi has said over the last few weeks, and I think I'm missing something. I mean, let's see. He says that, there is no king, there is only people power. And he set up that system and then went back to his tent decades ago. I'm missing something. And then there's the thing about the drug-crazed Islamicists that Osama bin Laden has brought into the country. People believe this? I mean, it really kind of pushes at the edge of credibility and then beyond it. And yet people do believe it. You know how you can tell? Because we've seen Volkswagens blow up, and we've seen mounted machine guns on ambulances, and we've seen mortar fire in playgrounds. People buy it. And I keep thinking I'm missing something. The trouble is, and the scariest thing about this whole thing, is that it happens all the time. It happens all the time that people believe things that aren't true. And if it didn't happen all the time, I don't think that so many fine examples of it would have made it into the Bible, like this clear one about Pilate. You remember good old Pilate? You know, Pilate's such a nice guy. Do you believe the Eastern Orthodox Church has made him a saint? Yeah. And he's such a nice guy because he didn't want to kill Jesus. All right? It really wasn't his fault. Okay? I'm still not clear why he had him flogged. And then I'm thinking that, he probably just said, well, the crowds, Osama bin Laden had drugged them. There was really nothing I could do. I mean, this is sort of the nature of things. Things get corrupted in our minds, and people end up believing it. Crucify him, they said. Crucify the one who understands the presence and the power of God. For Matthew, that is seen very clearly in the Torah, in the law, where the universe takes in the power of God and then expresses it. Isn't that what the Ten Commandments are about? Love the Lord your God. Receive that creative power, that creative voice within you, and then express it as you love your neighbor as yourself. When things get distorted, when you're living in a construct that has just fallen apart, then you can't hear that clear voice. And it happens all the time. Think we're any different? You really think we're any different? The 40th anniversary of the Stanford prison experiment. Some of you may remember it. They took a couple of dozen, or I don't know how many, 20, reasonably nice Stanford boys. And they split them in two groups. One group they put in a prison, a fake prison, and they made them inmates. And the other group, they made them guards. And over a period of time, the guards started mistreating the inmates. They had to stop the experiment before completion. It had gotten so bad. You put people in a situation like Goebbels says, and you tell them a lie. You give them that kind of power, and all of a sudden, people change. Their minds change. They become distorted. That's how it lived out it's how it's living out in Libya. It's how it lived out in Pilate's time. The fear that comes in allows people to be ruled, and violence becomes normal. It's as though humanity is prone to making the unspeakable simply normal. And it happens all the time. I'm concerned, actually, today about our young girls. I'm concerned about the way women are treated in our culture. Why? What happened to feminism? Feminism at one point was the question of feminine power able to express itself and stand on its own. A wonderful thing, and at a certain point there was then a celebration of the feminine, especially the feminine body, and women were owning that and saying, I have something to offer here, but now somehow that celebration is turned into objectification again. And now we have guys at Yale who are guilty of sexual harassment. We have the FBI investigating, for crying out loud. And why wouldn't it happen? Well, because our culture manages to objectify our girls for years and years. Now, I'm not excusing the men, you understand. It doesn't matter what somebody wears. If a guy's harassing somebody, they're harassing somebody. But we live in a culture that's a culture of lies, and so we have young girls, junior high school girls, exposing so much of their bodies that they're getting the kind of attention that they have no idea how to deal with. Now here's the top. Abercrombie & Fitch is marketing a bathing suit for 7-year-olds that has a push-up padded bra. We have made what is unspeakable normal. Why wouldn't it fall apart? We've made what's unspeakable normal, and the question then eventually ought to come to us. What is it that I think is normal that is actually unspeakable? What do I think is normal that is actually unspeakable? That's the question this text asks me today. Would I be one of those people who stood and yelled, "Crucify him"? I do. I think that there are conditions when human beings will do unspeakable things, and our theological forebearer, John Calvin, is maybe where I get part of that idea. Ever hear of the doctrine of total depravity? Some people misunderstand that. They misunderstand Calvin to think that he thinks all human beings are totally depraved. That's not exactly it. What he thinks is that the seeds of depravity live in every human soul. And when you watch it play out, when you watch an entire society move from unspeakable to normal, well, then maybe we have a picture of what it is. But what is it that you think is normal that isn't? And it's not easy to figure out either. It's not easy to figure out because some of the things that I used to think were unthinkable, that today I think are normal, I actually think I've made a good move. For instance, is going to be the full inclusion and participation of gay and lesbian people. The ability of gay and lesbian people to develop partnerships and relationships that are productive and move into the world. I'm not sure I want to let that one go. At one point, it was thought of as unspeakable. So it's not always easy because sometimes we make the move in a negative direction and sometimes, actually, we're able to find our way towards greater truth. So what do we do? Pilate's wife is kind of a clue, and it's sort of curious. Deborah Arca asked me about a month ago to write 1,000 words about Pilate's wife. And Deborah Arca Mooney used to be our cantor. She runs a website called Patheos.com, or is Christian Portal Manager. And she asked me to write this essay. There are only 38 words about Pilate's wife in the whole Bible. And I'm supposed to write 1,000 words. And so, you investigate what everybody knows about Pilate's wife, and what you find out is that they make stuff up. It's just amazing what people have made up about Pilate's wife. They've even given her a name. And I've forgotten what it is. Persona? Well, it doesn't matter. But they gave her a name, and they made her a saint as well. But the one thing we do know about her from the Scriptures? We know that she attended to a voice that was not beginning in the corrupted heart of tyrants. Attending to a voice that didn't find its origin in the corrupting influence of the human mind gone mad. She attended to a different voice. She attended to that voice in the subtler realm. She attended to a voice in her dreams. And because she listened to her dream, she could break through this corrupt structure and begin to see what truth might look like. There's good news in that, The good news is that that voice is always there. That voice is always speaking to us. That voice is always something that we can reach out and attend to. But that is what we have to do. Attend to the voice. Now, dreams is one way you attend to it. And some people resist that idea that dreams can mean much of anything, that they are actually messages from God. Obviously, Matthew thought so because he had the astrologers, the wise men. They listened to a dream and were able to avoid the face of tyranny. And Joseph listened to a dream and brought Jesus down into Egypt and avoided the face of tyranny. So Matthew thought so, but some people don't. Descartes, for instance. Descartes had no place for the meaning of dreams within his philosophy, and yet, the outline of his most famous book was put together in a dream. Not sure what to do about that. Some of the great scientific discoveries came at moments in a dream. There are ways in which we can attend to dreams, and we hear within the subtle realms that God is speaking to us, but there are other ways. And it's important, you see, because otherwise we're not going to know whether our normal is unspeakable or not. And so there are ways we can study the Scripture. Because the Scriptures in some ways talk back to us, ask us questions, force us to look at the world through Scripture's eyes. And it allows us into a conversation. But all of the ways, every single one of them, requires us to be quiet. We just have to be quiet. Just long enough to let the voice come through. It's why spiritual disciplines or practice can't be optional, because without them, we simply don't know whether our normal is unspeakable. Now, I know there's not a lot of room for that in the modernist view, but I say that's insanity, and how do I know? Well, I dreamed it. It does get circular, you see, because that's where faith starts. Faith begins with this trust that God is speaking and will make things clear. Now, whatever it is that you do to be able to just stop and allow that subtle voice to speak, well, that's what's going to lead us away from the corruption and away from the degradation of our society, because that voice is the voice that speaks, as Matthew would say, deep love that is then expressed into the world. And when we attend to that voice, and you read people who've attended to it for years and years, and you think about your own experiences, listening to the voice of God, what happens is that hope manages to come up for you. And there's a certain kind of peace that moves into the world, creative answers to things that you didn't think existed. In fact, there are shifts. Shifts within families, shifts within church cultures, shifts within the entire culture, because people attend to the presence of God. I love a little quote that one of my favorite poets, Brian Anders, gave us this week. If there is any secret to this life that I live, this is it. The sound of what cannot be seen sings within everything that can. And there's nothing more to it than that. We're not any different. We like to think we are. But we're not any different. And it's why we are called to attend to the voice of God, to attend to the dream, to attend to that subtle thing which changes the way we look at life. And when we do, we find the joy and beauty and deep pleasure emerge within us and those around us.